what is integrated business planning? We'll also talk about why you should do it. Some common challenges and barriers that Joe and I have seen clients go through. And then lastly, we're going to give you some homework. A couple of key pointers of things for you to get started and some things to take away here with.
So with that, where we'd like to start with, because integrated business planning can mean so many different things, we really want to set the context for that.
Yeah. Pizza's pizza, right? IBP is the same way. There's no real definition of what IBP is, but there's some core elements that Joe's going to talk us through what IBP is. There's fundamental things. Pizza, you have a crust, you've got sauce, and you have cheese. It doesn't matter what it is, it tastes delicious. But everyone has their own version of what it looks like, and that's okay. So we'll talk to you about what your IBP could look like as we go on through the presentation.
So because that definition isn't completely unanimous and everybody thinks this is what it is, we just want to start with the foundation today of S&OP. That's something that came into the marketplace probably 10, 15 years ago. And really, when you think about S&OP, you are trying to combine supply, demand, and that production side. When you think about production, that can mean any number of different things. Production can be, if you're in the insurance industry, that white-collar factory of processing claims and pushing things through. When S&OP really has been kind of launched and driving a lot of, I would say, more cooperation, it's handing those plans across the wall and letting somebody else run with that and then kind of maybe pulling that back into your overall financial plan. S&OP did a great job kind of getting everybody at least aligned to one financial plan. When we think about integrated business planning, it's more than just tossing a plan over a wall. Working in silos is something that's always been a problem. It always will be a problem. But if you can think about how you want to connect, integrated business planning is a way to kind of take that to the next level.
Yep, so IBP will help break down those barriers. So when we think of IBP, it's truly an evolution of S&OP. So you're taking those core elements of demand, supply, production. That's your pizza. That's your three main ingredients that you need. What happens, what Joe was saying, finance is typically a recipient of all these plans. What integrated business planning does, now they're a part of the planning versus being a recipient. That's a major mindset change that companies need to do. One other thing that we also are seeing is that for a truly integrated business process, there's all these other sub-functions to consider. So if we take demand, for example, if you have a tight IBP process, now you're able to look at innovation, how that impacts me. Promotions, how does that impact me? And just the fact of having finance in there, now you're able to do real-time analysis on what the impacts of promotions are to the company. And lastly, HR is essential. And you guys have been to a lot of these different workshops and seminars, right? So what's the one thing they always say? What's your most important asset? People. So HR needs to be involved to figure out where those skill gaps are, if they need to hire people to fit these skill gaps, and just really educate and really make that mindset change so we can be more collaborative as an organization. So when I was younger, my parents would always take me to the circus, and my favorite act was the juggler act. So if you guys been to the circus, what usually happens is there's a guy that gets on a unicycle. He's doing all this crazy stuff, right? Then his assistant comes out, throws bowling balls or bowling pins to them. And it's amazing because I've tried juggling, and it's so uncoordinated. I'm so uncoordinated. It's just really hard to juggle just 3 balls in general. But when it's a bowling pin, it's just uneven, just really hard to do. So this juggler takes 3. Then the assistant takes out a crazy object. It's like a knife, usually. And what does he do? He lights it on fire. He tosses it to the juggler. The juggler has the skill set and the mindset to know, okay, now I need to adjust the way that I'm timing, the way I'm catching and throwing these things, so I don't let any of these objects fall. The juggler, you need to have someone in your organization, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but you need someone to make sure that all the balls are moving, have the wherewithal to know the timing in order for your integrated business process to work properly. So with any planning, there's risks, right? There's internal risks and external risks. Let's talk about internal risks first. I listened to a podcast recently around employees. So at Microsoft, there was a bunch of artificial intelligence developers that had a contract that they were working on, but they felt like it wasn't really matching their values. This is something Microsoft had to address. Operations. If you're a products company, you're getting equipment from everywhere. You're getting supplies from China, you're getting it from Europe. You're a truly global company. If you miss one shipment, that can really be a detriment to your company. There's technology and physical risks as well. And the external risks. We don't live in a static environment. We're very dynamic. These are political, economic, social, and technology risks. For example, Affordable Care Act. There's been a lot of news around that. Brexit's crazy, like what's going on over there. That can really impact a lot of global companies. And interest rates in the US, there's been a lot of talk of it going up real quick. So how is your company addressing that? Integrated business planning gives you the venue for you to collaborate and talk to other functions so you can address this in a more singular manner. We want to ask you this question. Are you a hedgehog or a fox? There's this quote by Archilochus, who was a 7th century Greek poet, and he has this quote, "The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing." So when it comes to risks, both of these animals have a different strategy and approach to avoiding predators. The hedgehog, very effective. Its one defensive mechanism is to roll up in a ball with its spines poking out, so no predator can get to it. The fox doesn't have that capability. It has to be more nimble, has to be more adaptive and cunning. So a fox can either run very quickly, dig a hole, play dead. It has a lot of different tools to address the risks of getting eaten. So let me ask you this question. When it comes to risk, do you want to be a hedgehog or a fox in a world where we're so dynamic and there's so many things to consider? You should be the fox. Having a lot of ways to address risk is just diversification. And how you get that is involving a lot of different functions and a lot of different groups. Key thing here, collaborate as much as possible, because you're going to get more diverse thought. And from this, you're going to be having a lot of soft benefits. We talked about collaboration. We talked about the ability to do scenario-based modeling now because you're involving finance. And you're really moving towards a fact-based organization where now you have numbers to back up decisions or scenarios that you want to go down. All this drives hard benefits, and there's tons of studies out there. For example, a 3% increase in forecast accuracy driven through IBP can increase your profit margin by 3%. Productivity goes up 17% in the factories, and also inventory. Inventory levels on a range on average can go down between 30 to 40%. That's some wild numbers, and all this because of shorter planning cycles and collaboration.
So, sounds great, right? Shorter planning cycles, some of the effort associated with this can be that huge waste of time if you're not careful. And so when we talk about all the superpowers that you can have, there's a way to approach this that doesn't create so much investment that the return on that investment starts to feel like maybe it's not quite there. So we'd love to kind of explore that as we go through the rest of the conversation today. Data is something that is our communication language a lot of times. And so sometimes if we don't even have the same data sets, that can be challenging. Tools can be a way to potentially do that. It's not always the right tool depending on how big that question that we're trying to answer actually is. Processes, complex skills, you had mentioned the C-suite involvement. If they are involved but have their own priorities, things are going to move in that direction. So today, the last one there, culture. Is your culture actually ready for this? Do you actually want to collaborate? Do you like to stay in your silos? Sometimes physical space can be a detractor. If everybody's got high-walled, doored offices, send signs that maybe we're not ready to collaborate in some instances. So we'd love to explore three with you today: data, tools, and people. So when we talk about data, the first piece of advice I can really give you is when we talk about integrating your business plans, don't get too deep. And what I mean by that is if you think about what you need to do tomorrow or the next week or even the next month, you need to have a forecast accuracy that is very, very accurate, and we need to be able to understand exactly what's going to happen. As you start to put that horizon out to 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, if you're in insurance and you're launching a new product, that could be a year and a half before that plan actually hits the marketplace. If you think about doing that at 24 months, the amount of effort that you're going to spend trying to get that level of granularity in that plan, you're going to waste your time. It's going to take you so much effort to churn through those scenarios, so much time and energy to try to churn through all of that data so that you can come up with a 24-month plan. You're never going to want to do it again. You're going to do it once and say, okay, we got our AOP, and we're not doing it again until next year. IBP is not AOP. IBP is a way to play with those scenarios in a light way so that you can actually make decisions on a 80% accurate data set. Maybe you're boiling those hierarchies up. Maybe you're boiling the regions up to a certain level. Sometimes starting just with your data hierarchy can really help you, because then you can very easily trim off. We don't need anything below this. Everything above is how we're going to actually talk to each other. Because as soon as you get into the weeds, that waste of time becomes real. The superpower is when you can boil that up and get to a level that's easy, light, and nimble to be able to churn through scenarios very quickly. And then it's not a once-a-year activity, it's a once-a-month activity, or a once-a-week activity, depending on how nimble you can get that. The next point here is tools. When we think about tools, sometimes folks like to start here. The reality is everybody has planning tools already out there today. You have Hyperion, you have SAP, you have however many different optimizing engines on top of your platforms. And when we think about the tools that you may have, you have to really put that into the context of how many different functions are we actually trying to align. And so a couple of examples that came up from the audience. Hey, we're trying to combine customer to claims, or we're trying to cut customer to whatever part of the organization. If you actually look at some of those connection points, you may already have the data, or maybe it's fairly light and easy, and you can go to churn that through pretty quickly. If you think about, as you start to try to align more and more people and more functions, then you really have to have the tool conversation. Do we have anything in our stack today that can actually work, or do we need to go out and invest in something that can start to combine the data sets? We had an example of a project where there was a simple decision that was going to be made that seemed simple at the time. It was a retail client. We're going to change some shelf space orientation within our stores. If you think about that, sounds like, okay, store operations can handle that. When you start to dissect that decision, it's actually an inventory decision of where the inventory is going to sit. Because if it doesn't sit in the store, it needs to go in the back room. If it doesn't fit in the back room, it needs to go to the distribution center. And you start backing that up even further. What procurement plan or sourcing plan did we have for that product? Is that product already on a ship on its way here? And you start backing that decision up. Okay, well, maybe we're going to have a little bit of excess inventory. So do we need to run some more promotions to try to churn through the inventory? And then finance is going to ask the question, well, what's our profitability on that product now? So while that decision sounded like a very simple decision, if you were to actually make that on your own in store ops, sure, you can make that decision. But is it actually the most valuable decision for the company? And so we were actually working through that, and our recommendation in that instance was to go out and invest in a tool. because that was a situation that actually had a big enough impact. As you started to back that all the way through the chain, you had merchandising, you had sales, you had finance, you had all of these different groups, and the amount of data, it just didn't make sense to try to make all of those decisions day to day with just in a silo or trying to use Excel. If you flip that, there are some areas where you can just use Excel. Excel's okay. I'm not here to tell you that Excel isn't okay. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it works. You can go out and you can spend a lot of money aligning your data sets. You can go out and buy the biggest, fanciest, shiniest tool out there to do integrated business planning. If the people don't show up in the room to actually start collaborating together, it's not going to matter. It really isn't going to matter. You'll have spent a lot of time and money, and if the people aren't there to actually go collaborate, it's not going to work. And so when we think about how do we actually collaborate, you had a great question. How do we actually collaborate? When we think about what that means, it's about the decisions that we're trying to make. You don't need the sales folks to make all of the operational decisions. You don't need the operational folks to make all of the sales decisions. However, there is an overlap on that Venn diagram where you should probably make some decisions together. If you can align on the decisions you actually want to make together, then you can have buy-in and have the autonomy to go back and make the decisions on your own when that makes sense. So understanding that decision-making framework is really, really important. Because if your people aren't showing up and knowing why they're working together, it's going to be difficult. And that flows right into that scope piece of the metrics. If we're going to make these decisions, what metrics are we actually trying to influence? You shouldn't have everybody aligned to every single metric, but it gets back to the silos within the organization and even the senior execs. If they have numbers to hit and their bonus is tied to that, or your bonus is tied to that, or your incentives in any way are tied to that siloed organization's goals, that's where that time and effort and decision-making priority is going to be spent. And so if you can think about this in a way that you really start to get HR involved, how do these people make the decisions? What decisions do they want to make? And how are they incented to make the decisions together? Because if they're not incented to make the decisions together, you're going to be pushing uphill for a while. As soon as you start to flip that, people's pocketbooks is very important to them. And as you think about how you can impact that, it can influence a lot more than you think. Now, I'm not saying you need to go change all your comp structures. But if you start thinking about some of those senior level folks in the organization, that could be a good place to start, because those are the folks that are probably going to be in the room. Not everybody needs to be working jointly and making decisions, but as you start to climb the ladder, some of those folks should be in the room and maybe thinking about what that looks like.
Another call out there's companies like Walmart or Chevron that have centers of excellence just dedicated to HR data and metrics. So it's a thing that a lot of companies are now looking into because they know the importance of people, they know it's a financial impact. So what things can we do to make sure that from a financial point of view that we're good and we're secure?
Whether it's bowling pins or flaming chainsaws, whatever you're balancing, that juggler concept really is important, especially at the beginning. If you think about how you're going to bring folks together, somebody that's going to come to that conversation with an unbiased opinion about the decisions that you need to make and coordinating that we should be making this decision together is going to drive a little bit, it's going to drive an accountability on a group that doesn't have a vested interest in the ultimate decision. Because sometimes it's at odds what your personal goals might be if you're going to make a decision as a group. So that juggler role, especially as you're trying to get the kind of muscle memory of how to do this, is really, really important.
Couple key things for you guys to take away. We have 3 main takeaways that we want you to go home with. 1, just start collaborating. We talked about cooperation and collaboration earlier, I believe. So when companies are being cooperative, they just care about their own silos, their own goals. Start small and set goals. I mean, we heard from you guys, like some of you guys are on this journey. It's a long journey. It's not something that can happen overnight. It's a mindset shift. It requires alignment with a lot of people, a lot of functions like HR and IT that we talked about. So just set small goals. And I love this quote: if you can't do great things right now, do small things in a great way. Start small. And then lastly, we talked about the edge effect. Diverse thinking, we have all these studies out there that show the more diversity you have in thought, the more creative of a solution that you can get to help your company avoid all these risks that we had talked about earlier.
And so our homework for you is, if you're thinking about this, think about it in a couple different ways. When you think about your daily life, what are 2 different departments that you could benefit from working with? Maybe there's been some pain points with that department. Maybe you've seen some opportunities. Approach a conversation with that department with a mindset of, what can I do for you to help you plan better or achieve your goals? Start the conversation there. As they start to run through that, you're at that point flipping the conversation to, I would love to also get this from you. And just kind of open that line of communication. So see where that goes and see how you can start working together. The last point I would leave you with is, in your next planning session, look at the people in the room and just for a second pause before you get too far into it and say, is there somebody that isn't here? Because I bet that somebody maybe isn't in the room that probably could have a pretty good opinion on this or would be impacted by any of the decisions that are going to happen within that room. So thank you very much for your time today. We'd love to open it up for any questions while we have a few minutes here.